Aloha, this is Samuel Guy in Hawaii, and today we are looking at Cryo, the odd man out of the Borderlands 3 elements. It's the only element that doesn't do damage over time, but it instead slows and can freeze, which is both different and often very helpful. It's the one element that pretty much has crowd control kind of built into it. We're going to look at how slowing and freezing works, how cryo efficiency really works, how cryo works with multiple damage bar enemies, how to improve cryo efficiency, a little bit about cryo and each Vault Hunter. We'll cover all that, including a number of surprises. Okay, so let's jump into it and look at what the game says about cryo on the stat card. It says cryo damage effects. Cryo damage slows enemies, eventually freezing them. Cryo efficiency is the percentage of damage dealt that is applied as cryo. At 100% efficiency, enemies freeze at 20% health. Frozen enemies are unable to move and take 3 times melee damage. Now, some of this seems self-explanatory, but there's actually a bit more going on than what's listed, and some of this is actually misleading. Okay, I'll get to a lot of that in a bit. First up, though, we should look at what I call the cryo cycle. When we damage an enemy with cryo, the enemy can go through as many as 3 phases. Okay, phase 1 is the cryo effect. When we first damage an enemy with cryo, they immediately take on a white sheen, basically a layer of frost. This is the baseline cryo status effect, if you will. This actually has no practical immediate effect on an enemy. The frost does not slow or freeze, nor indicate how close we are to doing either of those things. We may slow or even freeze an enemy with our first shot if the weapon is strong enough, but if not, we still get this sheen. The sheen tells us that the target has been cryoed, if you will, and as long as we maintain that cryoed status, all cryo damage done counts towards slowing and eventually freezing the target. We maintain that status by doing continuous cryo damage, a term I'm going to use a lot. Okay, I say maintain because if we time it out, that sheen, if not fed by additional cryo damage, lasts about 5 seconds. As long as we do cryo damage at least once every 5 seconds, all that damage counts towards the required total to slow and then freeze. If we let the effect wear off, however, we start all over. The damage counter to slow and freeze the target starts over. So, maintaining that cryo effect is important, although not usually a problem. We usually concentrate on one target anyway. Occasionally, though, things happen. We get put in fight for your life, we have to switch to a more dangerous target, etc., and the cryo effect wears off. Additionally, other types of damage, other elements or non-elemental damage, do not count toward the freezing total. So when bullets are flying and enemies are being dotted by fire and shock and what have you, and not all the damage is cryo, it may take longer to freeze a target. Okay, phase 2 is slowing. Apply enough cryo and the target slows its movement and possibly its rate of fire. I'm not sure about that though. Now the slowing phase has at least 2 levels. Call them slow, very slow, really slow. Okay, there might be a third, but I've only been able to confirm at least 2. It also appears that the amount of damage required to reach each degree of slowed effect is proportional to what it's required to freeze. 1/3 for slow, 2/3 for very slow, and then they freeze. I'll talk about what it takes to freeze in a little bit. Phase 3 is frozen. Okay, target freezes, after which we kill it, either kill it or it thaws out. Okay, and it'll thaw out after about 5 seconds. Okay? If we don't kill the frozen target and it thaws, the cycle starts over. Now let's jump into the important part: cryo efficiency and freezing. What does it really take to freeze a target? Okay, to repeat what the stat card says, cryo efficiency is the percentage of damage dealt that is applied as cryo. At 100% efficiency, enemies freeze at 20% health. Now, while that statement is true, it's problematic because it's only true under a very narrow set of circumstances. Okay, namely, our weapon must be 100% cryo efficient. The target must have a single damage bar at full health. We must do all of our damage with that weapon, or efficiency at least, and the cryo effect, which I just explained, must not be allowed to wear off while we do all that damage. If we change any of those things, not just the cryo efficiency, if the target has more than 1 damage bar, if it's already taken some damage, if we swap weapons and add other elements, etc., the target will not freeze at 20% remaining health. And that's the big problem with that example. It's easy to visualize 20%, but it's prompted people to focus on remaining health. Okay, and remaining health is actually irrelevant. The 80% we remove by doing continuous cryo damage is what counts. Okay, why is this important? Many have assumed that if 100% efficiency freezes an enemy at 20% remaining health, 200% efficiency freezes it at 40% remaining health. This is incorrect. All other things being equal in the listed example, 200% cryo efficiency freezes an enemy with 60% remaining health, not 40%. How so? Okay. If we need to remove 80% of the damage bar to freeze at 100% efficiency, we need to do half of that, 40%, at 200% efficiency. Okay, and if we remove 40% of an enemy's health, that leaves what? 60%. Cryo is more powerful than a lot of us think. Cryo efficiency has an inverse relationship with damage that follows this formula. For single damage bar targets, 80 divided by the cryo efficiency is the fraction of the damage bar that we must remove by continuous cryo damage from one weapon in order to freeze. Ignore the percent sign and plug it in our efficiency like so. 80 divided by 100 is 0.8 or 80%. 80 divided by 200 is 0.4 or 40%. Okay, here's a quick table of examples illustrating how a lot of us thought cryo worked versus how it actually works. Okay, most of these are for specific weapons. There are a couple of rounded off benchmark numbers though, 200, 400, and 500%. The yellow column is how much continuous cryo damage is required to actually freeze an enemy. To the right of that is what's left if we start with an enemy with full health, and on the far right is what conventional wisdom has suggested remaining health would be when frozen. Okay, so this Creech pistol here is our 100% example. Now, if we go with conventional wisdom, this Westergun with 235% cryo efficiency should freeze an enemy with 47% remaining health, a little less than half health. But this is what actually happens. It freezes with about 65% remaining health. That's about 35% damage done, and that matches up with the table. Okay, so the other problem with the conventional wisdom is that the math breaks down above 500% efficiency. If we focus on the 20% health remaining, anything with a cryo efficiency of 500% or higher should technically freeze anything after doing even a point of damage. Okay, and that does not happen. This Frozen Devil and even some grenades with very high cryo efficiencies don't automatically freeze enemies unless they have very low hit points to start. Also, why, if 500 is enough, would you have something with 1,000% efficiency? Okay. Now, what about this sniper on the bottom here with cryo efficiency of 55%? Okay, damage to freeze equals 145% of total health. What does that mean? It means that any weapon with a cryo efficiency of 80% or less will, by itself, never freeze an enemy with a single damage bar. Okay, slow, yes. Freeze, no, because you can't do more than 100% of damage, right? Okay. What about multiple damage bars, though? Well, glad you asked. Here it gets a little tricky, although the underlying logic is pretty straightforward. To begin with, we've been talking about damage done and damage remaining as percentages of total health. It's easy to understand visually when we look at a damage bar, relatively easy to judge where 25%, 35%, 50%, etc. lies. What we are talking about, however, and what the game tracks is actual points of damage, hit points. This becomes very important when we start looking at enemies with the multiple damage bars. Okay, so here's how it works. The amount of continuous cryo damage required to freeze an enemy with the multiple damage bars equals the amount of damage required to freeze a single damage bar given the weapon cryo efficiency, whichever damage bar is largest. Okay, that's actually the same thing as what I've said before, except for that last part about the largest damage bar. What does this mean? It means that when an enemy has two or more damage bars, usually different type damage bars, shield and health, armor and shield, etc., the number of hit points in those separate bars are not always equal. One enemy type may have shield bars 70% the size of their health bar. Another, the ratio may be close to 50%. The bars are visually the same length, but the hit points they represent are usually different. Okay, I looked at a half dozen or so level 56, this is no mayhem, Mali 1 commandos, okay, frontline commandos and dash commandos. All of them appear to have shield bars totaling about 10k points, 10k hit points. However, the dash commandos had health bars in the 20k neighborhood, while the front lines were around 15, 16k. Okay, how does this affect cryo? Well, hypothetical example, just the easiest way to explain this. Let's say that a particular level and type of Mali 1 commando has a health bar with 1,000 hit points topped by a shield bar with 700 hit points. Okay, going back to our 100% cryo efficiency weapon example, 80% of the larger of the two, the health bar, is 800 points. So we need to do 800 points of continuous cryo damage in order to freeze this enemy. If the enemy starts with full health and shields, that means we need to strip the shield, 700 points, and then do 100 points of damage to the health bar to freeze the enemy. 700 plus 100 equals 800. Make sense? Okay. Additionally, if we let the enemy thaw out without inflicting more damage, that leaves them with 900 hit points of health. If we then start firing again, we can freeze them yet again, because 900 minus 800 will freeze them yet again with 100 points still remaining. Okay, depending upon weapon cryo efficiency and enemy total hit points, we may be able to do this multiple times in the course of combat. Additionally, the largest bar, the one with the most hit points, is not always the last or the bottom bar. Okay, I looked at a lot of Maliwan and COV enemies with shield and health bars, and the shield bars were always smaller than the health bars, the latter, the health bar, being on the bottom. This is not the case, however, with some Guardians. This possessed Spectre had an armor bar around 27-28k, sitting atop a shield bar of about 23 to 24k. So all these things are good things to keep in mind. Okay. So that's how Cryo works with the multiple damage bar enemies. How do we determine which bar is largest, though, and what the relative hit point totals or hit point percentages are for any given enemy? Well, there's two answers. The first and more important is, do we really care? Okay, if we're specifically using Cryo for its slowing and freezing benefits, does it really matter exactly where it happens? Either our build and tactics slow and freeze enemies quick enough and often enough to make Cryo viable, or it doesn't, in which case we have to change things. Okay, that's a trial and error for most of us. Very few people know about, understand, and much less do all the math I just covered, and then decide to try or not try out a build. Okay, it would be nice to know those numbers, yes, but it's not necessarily that useful. We look at the gear and the highest damage, highest DPS, higher cryo efficiency we can find, and go from there. The second answer to how we get all this info, and why I deflected all of you with the first cop-out answer, okay, how do we determine actual hit points for each damage bar for each enemy, is with great difficulty. Okay, that's the subject of a whole nother video that I may never even get to. I know Z-Karma has talked about doing this sort of thing. Maybe we'll compare notes. The important thing to remember, though, is that every enemy type is potentially very different. More importantly, collecting this kind of data in-game is both time-consuming and often really frustrating. Enemy damage data is not something we can collect on the range from the jack dummy or shooting a vehicle. We need live targets, and live targets don't like to stand still while we shoot them, and they usually have like-minded friends with them. Okay. Additionally, at least where Cryo is involved, it's often a delicate balancing act to get a weapon that does enough damage to freeze an enemy reasonably quickly, but not so much that it's impossible to tell where in the chunk of that last bit of damage done the freezing actually occurred. If we're shooting very high damage cryo gun at something, and okay, it gets to 60%, and then it gets to 40%, and it freezes somewhere in it. Did it freeze close to 60? Did it freeze close to 40? You know, hard to tell. So, on top of all that, even when recording and playing back footage frame by frame, it's often difficult to read damage numbers and or sort them out from each other to get accurate damage totals. Okay. And that's my excuse for not having those numbers, and I think it's a pretty damn good excuse. Okay, so we covered cryo basics with single damage bar enemies. Then we covered multiple damage bar enemies. What happens if we use multiple sources of cryo? A gun, a grenade, a Nova Shield, an action skill. We can combine damage from different sources with different cryo efficiencies, but how does that work? What if we're using a gun with 150% cryo efficiency as our main damage dealer, and we add a grenade with 800%? Okay. Fair warning, the math here gets a little tricky, and what I describe is going to be an educated guess on my part, although it fits what actually happens. If you'd rather not bother, skip ahead to the timestamp listed below. As tricky as it is, though, the math is not really important. What's important overall is to try to add sources that increase cryo efficiency as a proportion of cryo efficiency overall. Okay. Now, if you're still here, think of it this way. The game knows the target's total starting health, and more importantly, the total of the highest damage bar. What probably happens behind the scenes with cryo weaponry, and this is an educated guess, is that the game applies a modifier, a multiplier, to whatever cryo damage we do to a target based on cryo efficiency, and tracks that damage separately. If a target has 10,000 hit points and we shoot at it with a 100% cryo efficient gun, every point of damage is multiplied by 1.25. Okay, 8,000 times 1.25 equals 10,000. So when we do 8,000 points of cryo damage, the target is still standing with 2,000 actual hit points left. But since behind the scenes, cryo adjusted damage equals the target's maximum of 10,000, it freezes. Okay. Let's say instead, though, that we throw a grenade into the mix. We throw a cryo grenade with 800% cryo efficiency, and the grenade does 500 damage. But because cryo efficiency is 800%, the multiplier is 8 times 1.25, or 10. Okay, 10 times 500 is 5,000. So even though actual damage inflicted is only 500, it's still got 9,500 left. We're already halfway to freezing the target in terms of cryo adjusted damage. That's separate total that's being tracked. Now we only need to do 4,000 hit points of damage with the gun to freeze the target, because 4,000 times 1.25, the modifier for 100% cryo efficiency, is 5,000. 4,000 points from the gun plus 500 points from the grenade is 4,500 hit points removed. The target has 5,500 hit points left. But the total cryo adjusted points are 5,000 gun, 5,000 grenade. Put them together equals 10,000. Target freezes. Okay. So that's just with two sources. If we add more sources with different efficiencies, it gets more complex, but you get the idea. Okay. Adding sources also doesn't always mean adding more direct cryo damage. There are comms, artifacts, and Vault Hunter skills that increase cryo efficiency. Okay. Flax racks can be made to do cryo damage. Determining the actual damage is probably not too hard, but the skill itself doesn't tell us what the cryo efficiency is of those stacks. That's something for somebody else to figure out. Amara's Violent Tapestry, which expands rush stacks to boost status effect chance, actually boosts cryo efficiency by the same percentage for as long as it lasts. That's 30% max for just Violent Tapestry, 33% if we take Awakening, 66% if we take Avatar. At a Phase Zerker class mod, and that max jumps to about 83%, unless we Fake Grass to get to 100 rush stacks worth of Violent Tapestry, giving us, I believe, 330% increase when we expand those stacks. Let me check that real quick here. Yeah, okay. Also, Amara also has skills that increase elemental and restrict plain old damage. Okay. Zane has Binary System and Best Served Cold that both release Cryo Novas, as well as Winter's Drone, which converts Sentinel primary damage to cryo, and Trick of the Light, which provides bonus cryo damage, I think, across the board. Like Flak, though, none list cryo efficiency, although in the case of Trick of the Light, it's probably tied to whatever weapons are doing the damage. Okay. Zane also gets a boost to some of these skills with his Cold Warrior and Shock Raider class modes, although my understanding is that those comms are not very good. I'm an Amara main, what do I know? Okay. His Executive class mod can also increase status effect chance, which, if it works the same way as Amara's Violent Tapestry, should also increase efficiency. I don't really know. Again, Amara main talking here. Moze is the only one with no skills that add cryo damage or increase cryo efficiency. But again, there are plenty of ways to increase cryo efficiency, damage, and overall cryo effectiveness. These two artifacts here both have passives increasing cryo efficiency by 33%. That's the highest I've seen so far, but these are level 57. Level 60 is probably a little higher. Okay. There are a number of shields that release cryo novas under certain conditions. These can add quite a bit to whatever we need to freeze an enemy or freeze enemies outright. Okay. Like some Vault Hunter skills, though, most don't tell us their efficiency. The Frozen Heart Shield is kind of an exception. It doesn't list cryo efficiency either, but the description specifically says that it does X damage and freezes enemies, and it does just that. Okay. So to recap our progress so far, freezing single damage bar enemies, multiple damage bar enemies, multiple sources of cryo at one time, Vault Hunter skills and gear that increase cryo effectiveness, and how to improve cryo efficiency overall. What's left? A number of miscellaneous items. Okay, I haven't covered the triple melee bonus against frozen targets listed in the description. That particular mechanic, though, is pretty straightforward. It doesn't need further explanation. I mentioned slowing effects being proportional to freezing earlier before we discuss how cryo efficiency and proportionality works. So just to be clear, if it takes 9,000 points of damage to freeze an enemy, it appears to take 3,000 to slow it, and 6,000 to really slow it. 1/3, 2/3 freeze. Okay. Cryo can slow and stop vehicles in their tracks. They can't move. We can freeze their occupants. Vehicles we control are the same way, although Vault Hunters can't be frozen, but they can be slowed. If you played the game long enough, that should not be a surprise to you. If we freeze an enemy in the air, flying enemy, jumping enemy, phase grasp enemy, and it falls while still frozen, it takes damage from the fall. Not a whole lot, especially at higher difficulties, but it does take damage. Okay. Cryo is neutral towards health and shields, and gets a nice bonus versus armor. And compared to the other 4 elements on a baseline level, it does more damage than the other 4. A little over 6% better than fire, corrosion, or shock, and over 13% better than radiation. If you're not clear on that concept, I did a video on elemental weapon damage scaling, linked in the description below. The point is, if we have 2 or more otherwise identical variants of a gun parts-wise, with the only difference being the element or lack thereof, the highest base damage of all the elemental ones will be the cryo one. So something to keep in mind. 2 more things before we are about done. These are rather Amara centric, and I am an Amara main, and I go with what I know. Okay, now there may be similar types of mechanics involving other Vault Hunters, of which I am completely unaware. I can't do anything about that, but I think these are worth mentioning. Okay. The cryo effect is a status effect in that we apply it to an enemy and it sticks to that enemy for a set period of time without any further action by us. I talked about the sheen, the layer of frost, as the cryo effect, and the cryo effect is a status effect. The target status is cryoed for about 5 seconds. Unlike the other 4 elements, however, there is no percentage chance to proc it. It's automatic. It happens whenever we do cryo damage. Okay, is this important? Well, to Amara and maybe Zane players, yes and no. Okay, Violent Tapestry generates a rush stack, and more importantly, a Violent Tapestry stack every time we proc a status effect, except where cryo is concerned. Where cryo is concerned, even though the status effect is automatic, rush and Violent Tapestry stacks are not added every time we do cryo damage. Okay, this may happen whenever we slow or freeze an enemy. It may happen, as with all other elements, according to the listed or underlying elemental proc chance every weapon possesses. I am not 100% sure of either of these, and I'm not prepared to spend time testing it at the moment. I've observed this. Okay, the point here is that whatever is going on, the game does not let us add stacks every time we do cryo damage. If it did, we could max out Violent Tapestry stacks very quickly without any other skills or phase arc or comm, and that would be way too OP. Okay. Second, and this is Amara specific, if Amara has points in Wildfire, and she gets an enemy to the freezing threshold, the piece of damage that actually pushes it over that threshold, that actually freezes the enemy, can freeze any other nearby enemies, even if they haven't taken enough continuous cryo damage or any cryo damage up to that point. Okay, I target and freeze a Skag by removing about 35% of its health. This nearby Skag also freezes. Okay, it still has most of its health. Notice the frosted bridge between the two. That's Wildfire at work. Now, Wildfire, of course, maxes out at 40% chance to spread that freezing damage. So it's by no means a sure thing, but it's not nothing. Okay, and that's the miscellaneous stuff and important info on cryo overall. I do want to briefly talk about how we utilize cryo in a more general sense, though. When we get right down to it, slowing and freezing with cryo is a lot like doing damage over time with the other elements. High damage per second, DPS, can compensate for low cryo efficiency. And if it gets us to the freezing threshold fast enough, the actual threshold is less important. If we do enough continuous cryo damage fast enough, the targets will slow and will freeze. Okay. Alternatively, a high cryo efficiency weapon or weapon mix will allow us to freeze the target or targets after doing much less damage. But we need to be careful going down that route, because freezing is half the job. We still need to have a plan for finishing up the now frozen targets. Okay, freezing them takes them out of the fight for a few seconds, crowd control, but then they come back with a fair amount of health. So the best situation, of course, is to have as much cryo damage per second as possible with as high a cryo efficiency as we can get. But it all depends on a specific setup. Okay, and that's cryo. Okay, a lot of hopefully good info, hopefully some stuff you didn't know. If you like this content, please give me a like and consider subscribing so I know I'm on the right path and I will keep doing more. If you got any comments or questions, you can drop those below, or come find me on Twitch at twitchtv.com, some old guy in Hawaii, which is linked below. Okay, my schedule is fluid at the time of this post, but I'm pretty good about posting it ahead of time. I really hope to see you there. And as always, stay safe and thanks for watching.